which makes this crime not 4 murders and a suicide, but 5 murders. Huh! This was a totally different crime to what they initially thought it was. Hello, you wonderful human. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe. And if you're old here, hello again. My name's Kate Philpott. This is Sandy. And I cover true crime cases on my channel. We've gone a little comfier than normal today because I may have had a few drinks last night. And you might see some death behind my eyes. But anyway, today is another solved case. However, there is a lot of controversy behind this case. And I'm going to do my best to play devil's advocate. You can normally tell exactly what I'm thinking because I'm very expressive. But I'm gonna do my best today because honestly I am quite torn. And as we're going through this video, comment your thoughts down below because this is a case that just... there's like 50 twists. And people generally are quite split down the middle with it. So it'll be really interesting to see what the comment section's like. So let's get into this case. So this is the case of the White House Farm murders, and it's based on the Bamber family who lived in Essex. In the early hours of the morning on the 7th of August 1985, 5 family members were found killed in their home. What police didn't realise was that this case would cause controversy for years and years on end, and really there's still a big question mark today over who was responsible for these killings. So in order to make sense of the whole situation, let's get into some background. So June and Neville Bamber got married in 1949 and they lived in White House Farm in Essex. It was this massive Georgian house with tons and tons of land, and yeah, so they were pretty well off. The Bambers were pretty well known in the area, they had a good reputation and they were described as salt of the earth. Neville was like the strong farmer type and June was the more religious, traditional, just that kind of woman. And June was unfortunately suffering with depression for quite some time, and like obviously back in those days it was a lot more taboo and there was not really the level of understanding that there is about it today. So how it was handled back then was she was actually admitted to a I physically cannot say the word. So she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital on 2 occasions, once in 1995 and once in 1958. And she was actually treated with electroshock therapy, which I remember studying this because I studied psychology, and it's definitely not used as much in this day and age, but back then they weren't as good at it. Like it wasn't as safe to use. They literally tried to shock the depression out of you. But June and Neville did want to start a family, but unfortunately they couldn't actually conceive naturally, so they decided to adopt. So in 1957 they adopted Sheila, and in 1961 they adopted Jeremy. But a little bit about how the children grew up. They both went to private prep schools. Jeremy then went on to boarding school and Sheila went on to secretarial school. And Sheila and Jeremy definitely wanted more freedom than their parents provided them. And I believe the reason Jeremy didn't go to normal school was the fact that he would probably one day own the farm and be likely employing the kids that were in normal school, so it would have like made it kind of awkward for him. But when he went to the boarding school, he didn't have the best experience at all, so he allegedly was bullied and even sexually assaulted when he was there. Sheila, on the other hand, was described as devil child by June on a number of occasions, so they definitely had a less than ideal relationship. When she was 17 years old, Sheila got pregnant from her boyfriend at the time, whose name was Colin. Obviously, June was not happy about this at all. She was out of wedlock and June was very religious, traditional, so that just did not fly. So because of this, she basically forced her to get an abortion. She scheduled the abortion for her. And then of course she was very conflicted because since she was so religious and traditional, she didn't agree with abortion either. So, God, I hate organized religion sometimes. What does believing in God have to do with whether or not you can have an abortion? Why is that relevant to the subject? Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. It turned out that Sheila did eventually go on to marry this guy Colin, and then they decided they did want to start a family. So when they were trying to have a baby, Sheila actually had 2 miscarriages. So this was obviously really tough on her, but then luckily The tables turned and she ended up going on to have twins. She had 2 twin boys, Nicholas and Daniel. And this was in 1979. But Sheila's life wasn't happy-go-lucky for long because her husband ended up going on to have an affair, and then he left Sheila for the other woman. So Sheila's been through a lot at this point, and it did definitely take a toll on her mentally. So she eventually developed paranoid schizophrenia. She spoke about suicide, she spoke about killing her children, and she even referred to her children as devil children. Did they just throw those terms around in the 80s or like... And for a little while, Sheila did have a bit of a modelling career going for her. She was absolutely beautiful, by the way, but this did end up kind of fading out a little bit. So a little bit more about Jeremy then. After he finished school, his father paid for him to go to Australia and New Zealand and do a scuba diving course there, which, the dream. He apparently went on to have sexual relationships with men and women, and he was very talented in this department. I think that came out wrong. He just could really charm people quite well. But when he was over there, he definitely was not an angel. Sorry, but still. Jeremy broke into a jewellery shop and stole 2 expensive watches, one of which he brought home to his girlfriend in England. He then bragged to his girlfriend that he'd been involved in smuggling heroin overseas when he was in Australia and New Zealand. He had also left New Zealand pretty quickly because he was involved with a couple of people that were involved in an armed robbery. So it goes to show you, like, he was not spending time with like the best kind of people, you know. But obviously he eventually returned home and went back to work on the farm. And he really hated how little he was getting paid for the farm work. But realistically, his parents bought him a cottage that was about 3 miles away from the farm, which he was living in rent-free. They bought him a car and they gave him 8% of the family business, which was like a caravan site nearby. He was doing all right, you know? But a few weeks before the murders took place, Jeremy trashed and robbed the family's business at the caravan site. And this was only revealed after the murders took place, but he said that he did this so that he could really prove to the family that they needed a better security system. Alright, leading up to the crimes. So we're at the 6th of August 1985 now, the day before the murders. Sheila had only recently been released from the psychiatric hospital because she obviously suffered with her mental health quite a bit. She had paranoid schizophrenia, so she had been hospitalized until a couple of... I've seen some places say days, some places say weeks, so just shortly before the murders. But at this point, her parents were getting increasingly concerned about her mental state. A conversation happened that night between Sheila and Neville and June, and Neville and June basically told her that she should enroll her boys in daytime foster care, which is essentially like they get to come home and sleep in their own beds at night, but during the day they're essentially being brought up by somebody else. And they suggested this to her because they believed that she couldn't handle the responsibility of bringing up these 2 boys. So there was, of course, a bit of an argument, and Jeremy then left the premises at about 9:30 p.m. And according to him, he left considerable tension behind. Now, June's sister Pamela actually called June around 10 p.m. and obviously, you know, when a relative calls, they might speak to kind of everyone in the family briefly, and then they'll get back to like the main person they were going to talk to. So Pamela says that when she spoke to Sheila, she was a little bit quieter than normal, but nothing too out of the ordinary, if that makes sense. And it was about 6 hours later that Jeremy would receive a very concerning call from Neville. So at 3:36 a.m, Essex police receive a call from Jeremy Bamber, and he tells them that he received a call from his father, Neville, saying that Sheila had gone berserk and had gotten hold of one of the family's guns. He had tried to call Neville back, but for some reason or another he couldn't get through, so he called the police. Now, a lot of people find it strange that Jeremy called the police department as opposed to emergency services, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. At this point, all he got was a potential threat, and yes, it's a very aggressive potential threat, but still, like, he probably didn't think that what was about to happen was about to happen. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. And when Jeremy called, he was actually at his cottage and the police advised him to go to the house and they would meet him there. And the police got there before him. And obviously for them it was, okay, this is urgent. This is a very time-sensitive case. So they bombed down to the house and apparently they actually drove past Jeremy, who was driving laughably slow towards the house. So there is a bit of a, did he really think this was much of an emergency type of situation that was going on? But when they got there, the officers decided not to actually enter the house until armed backup had arrived, which, do you know what, that's totally fair because you don't know what you're walking into. There could be a massive threat for the police officers and so on and so forth. So I think that's fair enough. The only issue with this is that the armed backup didn't arrive until hours later. 4 hours later. So they only actually entered the house 4 hours after the police initially arrived, which is insane. It's kind of mental to me because if it didn't take that long, they could have easily saved one or more lives. But of course, since they had 4 hours to kill, they questioned Jeremy a bit while they were waiting around. Jeremy stated that Sheila was mentally ill, and he also disclosed to them that he had left a loaded rifle on the kitchen table because he had initially planned to go hunting that evening, but he just never got around to it. So there was a loaded rifle. Ow. I bit my lip. There was a loaded rifle on the kitchen table. So when police eventually entered the property, they were faced with a devastating scene. Neville Bamber was found in the kitchen and he had been shot. June Bamber was also found in the kitchen and she had been shot 7 times. Sheila's twin sons, who were 6 at this point, were in their beds and they had also been shot. Nicholas 3 times and Daniel 5 times. And there's a heartbreaking little detail that I found, and that was that one of them still had his thumb in his mouth from sucking his thumb. It just kind of highlights just how innocent they were. And Sheila was in the front bedroom laying on the ground with the rifle lying on top of her body and a holy Bible beside her. And she had been shot 3 times, twice in the throat and 1 up her chin. And the only immediate relative that was still alive was standing outside with the police, and that was Jeremy Bamber. And this obviously was not what he was expecting at all. So when they broke the news to him, he broke down in tears. He went into traumatic shock. He started getting sick. It was just, I mean, I get it. The crime scene suggested that Sheila had killed both her parents, both her sons, and then herself. And they were almost certain that this was the case. So as a result, the crime scene was definitely not investigated thoroughly enough. What drives me absolutely insane is that the officers that removed the rifle from Sheila's body weren't even wearing gloves or any protective gear for that matter, and the rifle itself wasn't even checked for fingerprints until weeks later. So within 12 to 14 hours of the murders, the whole crime scene was cleared. A lot of items were removed from the house, carpets and everything were removed, carpets were burned. It was like nothing ever happened here. And of course, this is before any forensic evidence could be taken from him. And it turned out that Jeremy had agreed to have all these things removed because of all the painful memories that they brought in. But of course, I mean, they didn't think they needed any forensic evidence. It was pretty cut and dry to them at that point. A woman had a mental break, committed a quadruple murder, and then took her own life. Simple. So forensic evidence wasn't exactly a priority. And only 3 days after the murders, the keys were handed back to Jeremy and other relatives. So on the 10th of August, some of Jeremy's cousins came to the farm to do a bit of an inventory with the family's solicitors. They thoroughly searched the house, and according to the officers, they seemed suspicious for some reason. Then they found something that really threw a spanner in the works and would end up totally throwing this case on its head. They found a silencer, which, if you're a bit like me and don't know a lot about guns, that's basically a part that you attach onto a gun that kind of reduces the sound a little bit. And this particular silencer would fit the rifle that was found on Sheila's body, and I guess it was considered unusual that it wasn't actually attached to the rifle. What was more unusual though was the fact that there was something red on this silencer. could have been red paint, could have been blood, could have been both. And there was also a grey hair attached. And these cousins were convinced that this had something to do with the case, so they had them sent off for forensic testing. Now, there was still a chance that this was from a rabbit or something like that, because this was the gun that they would use to go hunting, but it was worth a shot to test it. A few days later, the relatives contacted the police again because they found a scratch on the red mantelpiece in the kitchen, and this scratch was thought to be related to the silencer that they had found the day before, or the few days before. You know how the silencer looked like it had red paint on it, or blood, or both? Well, this could be the red paint, and it turned out it was. Then the forensic test came back, and this is where you've really got to pay attention. So any of you out there that are on another tab right now, get your ass back here, because this is important and you need to listen. You're gonna want to be here for this. So it turned out that there was in fact also blood on the silencer, and it was human blood. So not from a rabbit, not from hunting. It also came back that at least some of this blood belonged to Sheila, because it had this particular enzyme called AK1 that Sheila also had. And remember, they were adopted children, Sheila and Jeremy. There was still a chance that some of the blood belonged to June and Neville, but the lab weren't 100% of that. So we're getting quite technical here, but hang on a sec. If Sheila's blood is on the silencer, then how could the silencer have then been removed and put back in the box to be found by the relatives a few days later? Because if her blood is on the silencer, then she's dead. You know what I'm saying? So if Sheila didn't shoot herself, who shot her? Also, if this silencer was attached to the gun when Sheila was shot, which we now know it was, this would have made the gun longer. In fact, so long that it would have been physically impossible for Sheila to shoot herself with that gun, because her arms literally were not long enough. It was physically impossible. So both of these pieces of evidence tell us that actually Sheila was not the one to shoot herself, which makes this crime not 4 murders and a suicide, but 5 murders. Huh! This was a totally different crime to what they initially thought it was. Okay, before I move on with the investigation, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the funerals. So at the family's funerals, Jeremy's behaviour was described as suspicious. He was obviously inconsolable, devastated, etc, etc. And when I initially found that out, I was like, well, if 5 of your family members have been murdered and killed in such a tragic way, surely you're allowed to be devastated, no? But it was apparently all an act, because he only brought the emotions out when the cameras were on him. Because remember, this was a very high profile case, there was a lot of media there, and Jeremy totally played up to that. Also, then at the wake, Jeremy was laughing and joking around and saying things like, "I'm the boss now." I am uncomfortable with the energy we've created in the studio today. But then again, there are a lot of people that will use humor as kind of a crutch in uncomfortable situations. So it could have been something like that, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd love to know what you think about that. Jeremy then wanted to make the most of the media attention, and that's when he did something that I cannot get past. At all. He sent an inquiry to a newspaper offering to sell them 20 nude photos of his dead sister, Sheila. Thankfully, the newspaper did turn him down. They were like, no, thank you. Anyway, moving on. Jeremy did have a girlfriend at the time, but they had allegedly broken up because she overheard him talking to an ex-lover on the phone. And a couple of weeks after the murders, she came forward to police and, well, she told them that Jeremy had spoken to her about getting rid of his family himself. And on that very day, he allegedly told her, "It's tonight or never." So according to her, Jeremy was going to hire a hitman, this hitman being the family's plumber, which is very random to me, but anyway. And like I've said a few times already, I am going to play devil's advocate in this case. So yes, this might be because she felt betrayed by him, so she might not feel the need to cover for him anymore, but it also could be possible that she felt so betrayed that she acted out in rage to throw him under the bus. So even if she knew somehow that he didn't do anything, she might have still wanted to throw him under the bus because he kind of looked guilty already. Let's be real, it's not beyond the realms of possibility either way. So moving on to the 7th of September, where police really start focusing a lot more on Jeremy. With these pieces of evidence that have come forward, they really started thinking about everything in a totally different way. Then they figured that the only real motive that there could be to kill these 5 people would be the inheritance. I mean, it's no secret that the Bambers were pretty well off, and the only 2 heirs to this inheritance were Sheila, now dead, and Jeremy. So the police debated about this, and out of the 3 main officers that were working this case, 2 of them now believed that Jeremy was responsible, while one of them still thought that Sheila was responsible. So this was even splitting police down the middle. A few weeks later, on the 29th of September 1985, Jeremy Bamber was interviewed and charged with 5 counts of murder. Of course, he denied everything. So just over a year goes by until the trial starts. So it started on the 2nd of October in 1986. It was a 19-day trial and of course was a very, very high profile case. I mean, in this area they had like maybe 1 murder a year, but like for 5 family members to be hit, 4 or 5 to be murdered, 1 potential suicide. Obviously, it's hard to even talk about the case because we don't even know what kind of case it is. The prosecution's argument was that, of course, Jeremy killed all 5 of his family members and decided to take advantage of Sheila's mental illness to get away with it. During the trial, Jeremy acted polite, nice, charming, friendly, but it did seem to a few people that he was acting, and some people even said that he seemed amused at what was going on in the trial. The key witness in this case was, of course, Julie, his now ex-girlfriend. And essentially the jury had to decide whose story was more believable, Jeremy's or Julie's. The jury, by 10-2 majority, decided that Jeremy was the one to commit the murders, and that he did so in order to obtain his inheritance. He was therefore sentenced to 5 life sentences with a minimum of 25 years. So that seemed pretty cut and dry, but then, about 25 years later, more evidence came out that turned the whole thing around again. I don't know how in the world this information took so long to come out, but here we go. In those early hours of the morning on the 7th of August 1985, Jeremy was convinced that he saw some kind of movement on the farm at around 4:02 a.m. Literal movement through one of the upstairs windows. And when the police officers, eventually went in, which was around 7:35 a.m., 7:37 I think, they also heard movement upstairs, but they presumed that it was just other officers that were up there. Sounds fair enough. But no, not fair enough. In the initial documentation, it was stated that June and Neville Bamber were found in the kitchen at 7:37 a.m. And then at 8:10 a.m, 3 bodies were found upstairs. Sheila and Nicholas and Daniel. But in the trial, they repeatedly referred to the 4 bodies that were found upstairs. Sheila, the twin boys, and June. What? Oh! If anyone's ever watched Jonathan Creek, can we vibe? Because this seems to me like such a Jonathan Creek type of situation. So, I mean, dead bodies can't walk upstairs, right?
Theories suggest that as the team of 6 armed officers moved through the house, something unexpected happened.
There was a commotion, and one of the police officers, in his witness statement, refers to that. And his interpretation, or his explanation, is there was movement upstairs.
What were the noises mentioned in the statement? The document goes on to suggest it could have been movement from another officer, but by the time other police attended the scene, 4 bodies, not 3, were upstairs. The prosecution in the trial was resolute. Neville Bamber was discovered in the kitchen, the twins in their beds, and June and Sheila in the main bedroom upstairs. Some theories suggest Sheila moved from the kitchen up to the bedroom via one of the farm's 3 staircases, whilst the police were searching other areas of the house, having only injured herself with the first gunshot wound.
Forensic photographs of the crime scene suggested that around 10 a.m, Sheila still had blood running from her wounds. But if she was already dead at, say, 4 a.m, which is what we would have presumed, she couldn't have still been bleeding. So she must have died much later, like when the police were already inside the house. So 2 statements said this, and she also didn't have livor mortis when she was found. And for those of you that are like me that need to be reminded what that is every single time, livor mortis is the pooling of blood after somebody's passed away due to the gravity and lack of circulation and all. So it kind of makes the skin look purpley reddish at its lowest points. So this also suggests that she wasn't dead for that long. But according to the prosecution in the trial, Sheila had been dead from 3:30 a.m. and Jeremy and the police were outside from 3:45 a.m. So that doesn't make sense. And then there's yet another discrepancy. The original actual record of when those relatives handed in the silencer to police was actually stated to be on the 11th of September. But rewind a little bit to what I told you, there were a number of statements that stated that the silencer was found a whole month earlier on the 10th of August. My head hurts. So were there 2 silencers? But if there were, surely only one of them had blood and red paint on it. And even still, it is known that it would have been physically impossible for Sheila to shoot herself with the silencer on the gun. But then what about, I'm losing my mind here, guys. It's all very confusing, but I think what that does tell us is that we don't have the full story. So the trial continued, and then they threw another twist at us. Obviously, the prosecution claimed that Sheila's arms were physically too short for her to take her own life with the gun with the silencer on it. But Jeremy's defense conducted several experiments, and they found that this was not true. What? Now, the scratch mark evidence. So allegedly what happened was a fight broke out in the kitchen between Neville and Jeremy. And in this struggle, the silencer scratched the red mantelpiece. But in the original crime scene photos that were taken the day of the murders, the police photographer didn't pick up on any scratch on the mantelpiece at all. Also, because it was quite a deep scratch mark, you would imagine that some red flecks of paint or, some kind of debris would fall beneath that area, and there was nothing there. There was no debris that had fallen, there was no little bits of wooden flecks, there was no red paint, nothing. So then they demonstrated that actually the scratch mark was made after the fact and after the original crime scene photos were taken. So I know this is all very technical and kind of confusing, but basically what this is telling us is that there's no evidence that the silencer was even there during this struggle in the kitchen, and therefore might not be related to the case at all.
If the scratch was not on the mantel at the time of the murders, a large part of Jeremy Bamber's trial is flawed. The theory was that a violent struggle had taken place in the kitchen between Jeremy and his father, the silencer scratching the mantel in the process. The prosecution stated Sheila could not have fought with Neville Bamber. He would have simply overpowered her. Yet Neville was sat down when he died.
Poor Neville eventually died sitting on a chair, leaning forward. There's nothing in that tragic, ghastly picture that demands or refutes Sheila who did the deed.
And I know what you're thinking, but Kate, what about Sheila's blood that's on the silencer? Yeah, we got some updates on that too. So they identified that the blood was Sheila's blood because of the enzyme AK1 that was present in her blood. That was also present on the silencer. But what was not disclosed in the trial was this enzyme is also found in several animals, including rabbits. My poor hungover brain just can't. So what that tells us is that the silencer may never have even been on the gun when the murders took place. So maybe the police were originally right and she did commit the 4 murders and then take her own life. Also, it then became pretty evident that not a big enough deal was made about Sheila's mental state in the lead up to the the tragedy. Apparently the day before the killings, she was showing multiple signs of someone that was heading towards a psychotic break. And Sheila's psychiatrist had already stated that if she was faced with any opinion or possibility that someone could take her children away from her, that she could snap. And lo and behold, I mean, that's what the argument was about the day before the killings. In fact, only about 6 hours before the killings. So first we're thinking it's definitely Sheila, then we're thinking it's definitely Jeremy, now we're thinking, oh wait, maybe it is Sheila. And the one piece of evidence that keeps Jeremy kind of suspicious looking is the witness statement from Julie, his ex-girlfriend. According to her, he had hired a hitman to carry out the murders. But then it came out that the hitman in question, which was the family's plumber, had a rock-solid alibi for that day. Julie then admitted to the officers that after the breakdown of her relationship with Jeremy, she tried to smother him with a pillow. So maybe she's not as reputable as we thought. She said, "We then went to bed. We didn't sleep well at one point, and I got a pillow and put it over his head. And I said if he were dead, he would always be with me." Is this case for real? There are so many twists and turns, and it's just, we're back and we're forth and we're up and we're down. I don't know what is going on anymore. So it's pretty clear that over the years there have been plenty of discrepancies, plenty of misinformation, but the one thing that has never changed is Jeremy's story. Jeremy has maintained his innocence this whole time, and since he got into prison initially, he has been trying to appeal his case. There is one little detail that hasn't been discussed, and basically that one little piece of information is the fact that Jeremy said yes, he called the police that night, but his father would have called the police first. So surely if this was the case, there would be a record of it somewhere, right? Well, a document was then revealed, which was the official log of that very phone call. It was a phone call from Neville Bamber to police at 3:26 a.m. that day, stating that his daughter Sheila had gone berserk and had gotten a hold of one of his guns. The other log was from 10 minutes later, 3:36 a.m, when Jeremy called the police and basically told them that same story that Neville had also called him about. Okay, wait, hold up. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm confused. If Neville Bamber had already called the police, why were they not already on the way? And how did this information take 25 years to come out? I don't get it. But many documents to do with this case have been eternally privated and even destroyed. Like, even if these are mistakes and if Jeremy is in prison by mistake, it's not too late to make it right. And if you've got something that proves he is innocent, like your police department of 1985's reputation is not as important as this man's life, who could potentially be in there totally innocent. If he's innocent, he's already been in there for 35 years and he's spending every single day knowing that he might never get out, but then he also might actually be guilty. Oh, I don't know.
And what we are now absolutely certain of is that Jeremy's conviction is not only unsustainable, but it is wrong. That Jeremy Bamber is an innocent man.
I'm absolutely convinced, unequivocally, right man is behind bars.
Interestingly enough, the extended family of the Bambers still believe that Jeremy is guilty, and they speak out about that frequently. In 1994, Jeremy's 25-year minimum was actually changed to a whole life tariff, but of course that was before all this new evidence came out that kind of made him look not as guilty, so but that's where the information kind of trails off. This case is unbelievable, and to be honest, this is probably the case that I am the most excited to hear people's opinions on, because it generally is quite split down the middle. Do you think Sheila killed her parents and her sons and then herself, or do you think Jeremy killed all 5 of them? But then also, like, Jeremy was such a sketchy weirdo at the funerals and like at the wake, and like selling his dead sister's nude photos to a newspaper for attention. Like, but then even though that's really fucking weird, it's also not proof that you murdered 5 people. So anyway, look, comment down below and let's have a chat about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please give me a like, or hey, I mean, if you didn't like it, then go on and give it a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And my TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram are all katephilpott_YT. So go follow me on there. That's where I'll be doing any case updates and stuff. Also, I finally figured out how to do true crime on TikTok properly. Like, you've got to fit everything into 60 seconds, so you have to pick like the most important points, and especially for the more wild cases, like every single sentence is like so go follow me on there if you want your mind blown. Anyway, I'm gonna go. I'm sending you lots of love and happiness, and I'll see you in next week's video. Bye!